Welcome to episode 112 of Rubbish Talk with me, Alasdair.
And me, Serena Powell.
And myself, Connor Benton.
Welcome, guys. Welcome. Lovely to have you on. So you both, Connor and Serena, you both work for an organisation called Go4Greener. So maybe, Serena, could you maybe just explain a little bit about background to the company, what it does?
Yeah, so we're predominantly a hazardous waste transfer station based in Derby. Cover a whole range of different things from commodity trading, your cardboard, your plastics, to hazardous waste, WEEE waste. We have a dismantling facility. And I guess the new thing on the block is the Advetec aerobic digestion, which is turning nappies, sanitary waste, offensive waste into SRF.
So you've used a couple of our favourite things, Serena. You've used a couple of acronyms there. So WEEE was waste electrical and electronic equipment.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned SRF. Could you maybe explain what SRF is?
So SRF is solid recovered fuel. So it's fuel that can be used in sort of the cement industry as a alternative to fossil fuels.
Okay, so more about that in a minute. But in terms of your role at the facility, Serena, could you maybe talk us through what you do there?
So I am the site chemist at Go4Greener, along with the site manager. So it's sort of a very varied role. No day is the same, from sort of doing operations and day-to-day running of the site, health and safety, maintenance, to doing the technical side, technical assessment and testing of hazardous waste.
So we had Aaron McIntyre recently, and he does a lot of the waste collections for hazardous waste. So he's going out into businesses, trying to work out with the various chemicals they've got, and then packaging them up to yourself. So is that the type of waste you're getting into the site from operators like that?
Yes, we do a lot of. I'm often out on the road. I'll do lab chem packs, so that involves going to sites. There'll be a lot of unknowns, different classifications, classes of waste. And I'll sort, segregate, pack, list, and make sure it's safe and good to go, basically.
Well, the one question I asked, this is maybe an unfair question. One of the questions asked is, how do you go about, if you turn up at a business and I've got a 20-gallon drum filled with something, how do you go about trying to work out what it was? What's your sort of process? Obviously, if there's no labels or markings on it.
If there's no labels, it depends on quantities and what I can deduce on site. So I can do very basic testing whilst on site. I can test if it's oxidizing, what its pH is. I can look at if there's an odor and things like that. But if it's, I get to a point where I have no idea what this is, then it will be a case of I'll take a sample, bring it back to site, and then we'll go from there and collect it once we know what it is.
And Connor, what about yourself? What's your role at the facility?
So I'm the technical director for Go4Greener Waste Management, where predominantly I'm appeasing the Environment Agency list of regulations, making sure that everything is run compliantly on site. Any updates to legislation is implemented as smoothly as possible, really.
In terms, just for background for myself, how long has the site been operational for?
So this site, we've been here for 9 years. We've gone through 2 permit variations thus far. Adding on additional EWC codes, extending permit boundaries, and with the new requirements for the exemption reform, we're going through a further variation to throw a few more activities and EWC codes onto the permit to allow us to continue our activities.
That sounds good. So it sounds like you're well set up for where you are. So going back a little bit of a step, Serena, did you always plan to get into the waste industry, or was this well, commonly with our guests, it's a mistake. They've just fallen into the waste industry and then discovered they actually quite enjoy it?
Yeah, so I graduated university. I was in Nottingham. I had to move back home, and I sort of sat at home and I thought, what am I going to do? I did see myself going down.
What was your degree in?
I did chemistry.
Did chemistry. Okay, so you're fairly well. At least your degree is fairly well suited to try and work out what chemicals you're getting in the site.
Yeah.
So that's a good start.
And this job came up. It was literally about a 5-minute drive away. It was a site chemist at a hazardous waste transfer station down in Kent. And I thought, well, let's give it a go. There wasn't a whole lot in terms of research on the market at that time, so I gave it a go. Thought, this will do for 3 to 6 months until I figure out what I'm doing, and ended up loving it, and here I am.
So what do you think? What do you particularly like, or what did you particularly like about it? Obviously, it's your first job, and you're just keen to get on and so on. But what was the attraction?
I liked the variation of it, the fact that I wasn't confined to a lab. I had time in the lab, but also I had time out on site. I had time visiting customers. I had time looking at legislation and a whole, pricing, getting into commercials. You get to do a bit of everything, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah. I always, so sometimes we use a lot of the work we do, we use labs for water quality testing and so on. And every so often you get an invite to one of the labs to go around and see it. And I always just think it just looks like a horrible environment to work in. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it, in the same way the waste industry, they say, is like Marmite. I think the same can be said.
You've got to either love it or hate it.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Same questions yourself, Connor. How did you get into the waste sector?
I think predominantly you are correct in saying that a lot of people in this industry do fall in completely by accident, and I'm no exception. When I was 17, looking for different apprentices, I came across one for a transport admin apprentice. Applied for the role thinking that would be a good place to start my career, and it just so happened to be a hazardous waste transfer facility. And whilst in and amongst it, you get so engrossed in all the peculiar things across the industry, and it sort of captured my attention. I thought, this is brilliant, and it sort of just spiraled and evolved from there.
So you literally left school and straight into the waste sector?
Straight in, yeah. And it's interesting because I think the variation is unlike any other industry, because like Serena say, you've got so many different sections to it, operationally, commercially, technically, logistically, and you do have to have an understanding or a brief understanding of each different moving part, and it is incredibly interesting.
Absolutely. So looking back at what you've both done up till now, you're both relatively young in comparison to myself. Any sort of career highlights? Any bits you would think, oh, I wish I wasn't doing these complicated jobs now. I wish I was back doing X, Y, and Z. Any sort of highlights from previous life?
Yeah. So I think for me was the first time that I was asked to talk on a technical summit with some very, very experienced individuals, and we were talking on a similar setup to this, not quite a podcast, but it was sort of a summit where we were discussing the complexities of certain operations, and diving into the operational issues of some complex setups. I was sat there waiting for my talk time to come up, and there was about 3,000 individuals waiting in the lobby to hear what I had to say. And it was those nerves, breaking. And I thought, you know what, if I was a lorry driver right now, I wouldn't be feeling these sweaty palms. But, it was... I enjoyed it very much.
I used to, in one of my previous jobs, I used to drive around the country quite a lot with a civil engineer, and he used to, every time he drove by, like somebody sweeping the streets or lifting the bins or whatever, he was like, oh, they don't have any stress, they don't have any stress. They're just like, they're just going about their day-to-day life. So I sort of understand that. What about yourself, Serena? Anything you look back and think that, were these early days your favourites, or is your current role your favourite? Or
I'd say my current role is my favourite. As much as I loved being a site chemist, it was very much that was my role, and that was what I did every day. But being at Go4Greener, with it being a family-run business, it's so much more hands-on, and I get involved in so many different things. I'd say one of the big things when I first started, it was when we were launching the Advetec machine, and Connor was beginning the permit application process, and he was like, right, I need you to jump on this with me. I was like, what, we're applying for a permit? I've never done that before. He was like, yep. I was like, okay. So we put our heads together, and it took a while, didn't it? It was about 12, 18 months delving through legislation, reading loads of documents, but we got there, and got it all approved and over the line. So
we'll come on to a bit about the Advetec technology in a minute. But again, looking back with your careers, any disasters you've had? Anything where you think, oh goodness, if I'd stuck in at school, I would have got a non-waste related job, and I wouldn't be standing here in a pile of waste or whatever it might be. Probably yourself, Serena, first.
I'd say one of the moments I had not so long ago, I went to do a site clearance, and from the photos it all looked, fairly normal. We had some old stock. Once I got there, we had about 3 families of rats. We were waded through mud. We were almost like knee high in like water and mud. All the bins were full, and we were just like, I just looked around. I was like, what am I doing here? What have I signed up for? But you get the job done. Come home filthy, tired, but all in a day's work.
And did you manage to do the job without bringing the rats with you?
Well, I think the driver almost got in the lorry and drove home. He was absolutely having kittens, trying to get these rats out of the IBCs. But yeah, I don't think we left any.
That was always the we had. I've told this story in the rubbish dump before. I think one of the landfill sites I used to run, you generally never had. Most people don't believe you, but a busy landfill site, you generally don't have a rodent problem because the waste is moving in so quickly, and it's not environmental like. But the local Craig Tara, which used to be the Butlins holiday park, was getting demolished, and it was all these concrete prefab buildings. And the place must have been absolutely crawling with rats. So we were getting all this waste in, and the trucks were literally turning up and the rats were jumping out the trucks. So after that, we had quite a big rodent problem. And one of the machine drivers used to have this problem that the rats were basically nesting in his machine. So they were in the belly plate of so when he went to grease the machine, he had to scare the rats away to get in and grease the machine. And obviously there's health implications, but we lose disease and things like that. We had to very careful about the hygiene. So I fully understand your issue with the rats. What about yourself, Connor?
I mean, a strange story I could tell that could have been disastrous. We're talking a good number of years ago now. On the operational floor, we had a delivery from HWRC sites, which is your Waste Recycling Council sites for the general public to tip at. And they were bringing in around 10 cut-off IBCs of mixed paints, which are typically your emulsion and your gloss paints. And, it just needs to be segregated through. And as the lads were going through, they came across some German pyrotechnics from World War II. So we had to call the bomb squad to come out onto site and just to make sure that it was all safe.
It's just incredible. It's incredible what people bring to these sites. And just, you do wonder. So going back, I was quite keen. Part of the reason I was keen to talk to yourselves was the Advetec technology. So I'm aware of the Advetec technology, and I think they put a system into the Western Isles for residual waste. But either if you maybe do a sort of brief description of what it is, what it does, and whether you're fully commissioned and processing at the moment.
Yeah, so the unit itself is an XO22, which is the largest scale unit that Advetec manufacture and supply. So at current, we are at full capacity, which is processing 10 tons. And the processing material itself is offensive healthcare waste.
10 ton, is that 10 ton per day?
Yes, per 10 ton per day. Because of it being an aerobic digester, there's limits to the organic material being broken down through the microbacteria that's in the system. And so we do operate 7 days a week, which gives us a capacity of 70 ton per week. The way that the process works, just as a brief overview, is we put through healthcare waste, which can be collected from washrooms, restaurants, dentists, etc. And this is predominantly sort of 85-90% nappy waste and sanitary products, which is high in organic material. It goes through an enclosed shredder, through a screw auger, which implements the biostimulant, should we say, which is a secret recipe formula conjured up by the wizards of Advetec. And then in the internal chambers, initially the process is heated via internal pads, which get it up to the right temperature for the bacteria to start feeding on all the organic material. And then from that, it becomes an exothermic reaction, which self-feeds the temperature and keeps it at a certain level as the material is then pushed through very slowly over a 72-hour window before being exited. And at that point, we've got an SRF, the solid recovered fuel, which has a reduced moisture content, which is appropriate to go through a burning process as an alternative fuel.
So is that a batch process or is it a continuous process?
It's continual over a 12-hour period per day, and then it has 12 hours through the night to very slowly be churned through the system internally. So that 10 ton, we could spread that 10 ton over a 24-hour window or over a 10-hour window.
And then in terms of so your product you get out of the SRF, is there any standards in terms of hygiene waste you need to meet? Is there any sort of temperature limits you need to hit or time? in the vessel or whatever?
Okay, so the machine is very intuitive. In terms of humidity, that's a criteria that we need to hit. We need to have a reduced moisture content that hits the minimum percentage to constitute as something that can be burned in the kilns, because it needs to have a high enough calorific value to drive enough heat for the manufacture process. Say if you're burning this fuel in a cement kiln to generate cement, that needs to be a very high temperature. So we need to make sure that there's no moisture in there to reach that point. But back to the machine itself, because it's on load cells, it weighs the material as it goes through. So you can remotely access the database of the machine, and it will tell you the proposed weight of what's coming out the back end, therefore working out the moisture content reduction as it goes through the process. So we can slow it down and leave it in the machine for longer to reduce the humidity if necessary, but we've got it ironed out to around 72 hours from input to exit.
So I suppose just thinking about the sort of commercials of it all, you're primarily getting a if you like, a moisture loss. So if you take 10 tons in, you're driving off a fair percentage of moisture, so you've got less waste to deal with.
Yes.
Are you able to recover a value from this? Or are you selling that as a fuel, or as a sort of free disposal type arrangement?
At current, it's not a rebatable commodity. It's not something that we can sell. Hopefully in the future, with more options in the market for people wanting this type of material, it might evolve into that. It's something that we would much prefer across the whole industry, to be using material that would otherwise be burnt off in energy from waste plants or landfill, actually being bought in as a fuel instead of digging up coal or using propane or butane gases, etc. But the current market, it is a reduced rate, so it's commercially more viable than landfill, with the landfill taxes on the rise. And very much like you say, with a moisture content reduction of around 50%, if you're putting 1 ton in, you're typically getting around 500 kilos out the back end.
Yeah. So I suppose in terms of real basic economics, if you put that hygiene waste straight to incineration, there'd be a cost attached to that. You're putting it through your plant, you're driving off 50% of the moisture, and then you're getting a better rate for the remaining 50% that's going to effectively waste energy facility. Is that reasonable?
That is correct. That's a correct statement.
Yeah. Good. So in terms of how long's the plant been up and running for?
So it was commissioned in December 2025. And from there's been some slight engineering adjustments just to improve the efficiency of it. And we are continually improving it. Being the first of its kind to treat offensive and healthcare waste in this manner, we are constantly evolving it and looking at further options to further treat the waste to extract the absolute most out of the material.
How did you say interest? I've been I've seen a few Advetec webinars and so on when they've been promoting their technology, and I always find it a bit strange looking at these things when you've almost got this magic box with a secret recipe, and it's like, do you really want to believe these guys? How did you go about that process of actually selecting them as a technology over other things that are in the market?
I think it was a mixture of a few different things. One of them being the innovative nature of the founders of this business, who believe that pushing for innovative ideas and putting investment into the unknown is the only way to truly strive for a circular economy, which is what we're all after at the end of the day. And also, we were looking at viable options on a science basis. So we were looking at the waste stream itself, what the issues were, the risks, and how best to mitigate the risks and extract the most value from the material. And the conclusion was, you need to reduce all of the organics to nil and reduce the humidity and moisture content for it to be considered as in any way useful. And it just so happened to the Advetec XO22 was a very viable option for it. So we got into discussions, and we were unsure to begin with whether this process would actually be applicable, because we believe that it's been tried and tested previously, a similar process, but not quite the same, and they hadn't been successful. So what we did is we looked at the data, and we came up with a trial, a 3-phase trial, and each part of the trial, on best case scenarios, worst case scenario, and your average, they all came out with better than predicted results. So from there, it sort of snowballed, and we got into commercial agreements, and here we are today.
Good. No, it's all. I always love it when I hear, people have invested in technology and they've got it commissioned, they've got it up and running, they've got it working, and it's doing what it's meant to be doing. Because in the waste sector, there's so many sites I know that they've bought technology and then it's sitting in a pile in the corner because they've not been able to make it work. For yourself, Serena, in terms of the actual operation of the plant, are you involved with the operation in terms of are there any sort of emissions? Obviously, you get your SRF coming at the end. Is there any emissions and so on that you need to be careful about and monitor and so on?
So the Advetec is fitted with stack monitoring, so that live data is fed to us and to Advetec. So that is a constant thing that we monitor. And the other thing is odor. You would think that, you're shredding nappies, sanitary products, that it's going to have a really strong odor. Surprisingly not, but obviously that is something that we have to constantly be aware of and monitor. So I'm always doing walk around checks and making sure everything is as it should be. But yeah, I mean, it's minimal. We've had 0 complaints, and yeah, just it's
Yeah.
quite a low maintenance machine really. Now it's up and running. It's just a case of the machine does the rest.
So certainly, it's to a certain extent, if I understand it correctly, you're loading up the machine effectively, and then you're effectively letting it get on with it and monitoring the process. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's just it's loading and obviously getting the flock out the other end and getting that into rows ready to go. Yeah, that is the machine is, as you described, the magic box. It just chugs away.
The magic box does actually work. Eh? That's a rare thing, a magic box. It must be quite hard for them to sell a magic box. It's that sales piece. And I know when they were opening the site in Western Isles, they were quite keen to promote it and get people out to see it because they were, it's always one of these ones that once people see something, they can sort of realise how it works. And in terms of obviously you work for a successful company. And what are the sort of plans looking ahead in terms of growth ambitions? Any other exciting projects, or is it all top secret and you're not allowed to tell us?
No, so in terms of the next steps for the business growth, ideally we would like to expand our logistical reach. So operationally, we are very prideful of our service offerings, and we'd just like to be able to reach other sections of the UK. I mean, to start with, being in Derbyshire is very optimally placed to reach different avenues of the UK. But in terms of future growth, we'd like to have a site down south, typically towards Portsmouth, Southampton, and then one a bit further up north, potentially Newcastle, and then just have a centralised corridor of 3 sites where we can service, all of our customers across the UK.
That sounds exciting. Another thing we touched on briefly, I think it was yourself, Connor, you mentioned the waste electrical and electronic equipment recycling you do. What type of work do you do in that space? Are you dismantling stuff, or are you just collecting it all together and send it to a reprocessor?
Okay, so it does depend on the type of material. So if we've got things like PC towers, we would dismantle those to separate the boards from the hard drives from the shell. And then they can be sent offwards separately for repurpose, to be rebuilt, to be reused as another product. And other electronic waste, where it's single units, servers, etc., they would be sent off as they are to be broken down by AATFs, where obviously they've got the different categories to report on.
And do you get involved in the battery vape space at the moment?
So we do have customers that have a multitude of different batteries, nickel cadmiums, leads, lines, lithiums. What we tend to do is just collect, safely store on site, ship to the appropriate battery recycling plant. Vapes, we have a very, very well built up relationship with a supplier who is a leader in the vapes treatment sector. And so we partner our customers to have one of their vessels on site, and they directly do the pickups to mitigate the risk of obviously having vapes across multiple waste transfer stations. The less that we have on sites that aren't specifically set up to handle them, I think would reduce the risk of fires that are sort of blistering across the country.
Yeah, it's scary subject. And how are you finding the actual battery recycling space? Because when I've looked at this market before, there's plenty of sites gathering batteries up, but there's actually very, very few that are actually taking a battery and turning it back into any meaningful products. How are you finding that? Or are you having to ship them overseas for that?
No, so we're quite lucky in the sense that we have managed to partner and have useful discussions with the very few treatment sites within the UK that can take the material. And although it's not 100% recovery, they are recovering as much of the precious metals from things as possible. For an example, with your lithiums, you want to extract the black mass through a process that, mitigates the fire risks, etc. And then I am always being shipped off abroad after processing.
So, anything exciting you're working on, Serena, for the next few years?
Um,
Are you just having to get your head down and get the plant working and make sure the site's making money?
yeah, it's exciting times here. I think now we've got this machine in place. It's just, yeah, getting our heads together and expanding the business. I think we're only going up from here, to be honest.
That sounds like a good setup. I think the initial contact I had with yourselves was through Tina Jackson and the waste the technical company managers forum, and she posted out the site visit, and I was it's far too far away for me to come to, but that was the connection, and I saw you were doing the nappies and thought, I need to talk to you guys. You've got Tina to thank for connecting us together, and she was on episode 110 there, I think it was just a few weeks ago. So, in terms of looking at the big bad wide world of waste management, what do you think the big challenges are going forward in the next few years, Serena?
I'd say one big thing is obviously the commercial sector of the waste industry. There's a lot of education and people are definitely moving in the right direction towards dealing with waste appropriately. But I think there needs to be a lot more education for domestic waste, your WEEE waste, your vapes, your batteries, proper segregation of recycling. And I think it just needs to be spoken about more, also made simpler for the public and more relatable, more easy to access. And I think that will change a lot.
We actually recorded a news section for Rubbish Talk this week, and one of the ones I made, there's so much stuff in the press in the UK, particularly in England, because of simpler recycling news, and some of it's just nonsense, just like, it's like 30 things you're no longer allowed to recycle, and it's like, no, these 30 things were never allowed to I've never allowed in your recycling bin before. It's just like, and you just feel, I wish there was some better consistency as to what, I think it's this thing, I think what people, in my view, there's this thing that everybody thinks everything can be recycled. And yes, in theory, everything can be recycled, but can you collect it economically? Can you bulk it up? Can you get it to a facility? Can that actually do anything meaningful with that material? And can it, generate revenue from that? If none of these things, if one of these things can't happen, then it's not going to be recycled. And it's just this, I think part of the reason we set up this podcast was to try and, share that, if you like, knowledge of how complex the sector is and why it's complex. So totally agree with that one, Serena, in terms of just trying to do that education piece. What about yourself, Connor?
I think one thing that we need to look out for is how much waste we are actually exporting from this country. Specifically for me, and the things that I have to see day to day is TFS material, which is trans-frontier shipment waste, resins, epoxies, isocyanates that are leaving this country in absolute masses. And the fact that it is more viable at current to put 20 ton on a truck and ship it thousands of miles away to be dealt with at a different plant in another country, it just blows my mind. We should be able to have the infrastructure within the UK to deal with the waste generated in the UK.
I've got a little bit of a campaign at the moment. Another one of my hobby horses is we should be splitting out the data to say that the material is either prepared for recycling or actually recycled. And if we did that, our current recycling rates of 60% or whatever would plummet through the floor, because most of what we're doing in the UK is preparing material for recycling, and then we're getting other people to do the actual recycling. But it would actually, as you said, Connor, it would then put the focus on where there's opportunities in the market for industry to invest and as you say, keep that, the jobs, the opportunities in the UK rather than sending it overseas. So do you try, as an organisation, and use UK-based where you can?
100%, yeah. So anything that can be dealt with locally, because, if we're looking at net zero and, environmental conscientiousness, we want to keep things as close as possible for the transport element, for the commercial viability of, the local areas of which we live. But unfortunately, some of the waste that we handle and deal with, the only viable disposable at current is unfortunately sticking it on a container and shipping it miles and miles away.
It's scary, isn't it? It's very scary. I remember years ago doing a planning application for a site in North Ayrshire it was for a hazardous waste incinerator, and the council was very much, we only want to deal with waste generated in North Ayrshire Council area. And at the time, the Environment Agency did an interrogator. They would send you a compact disc with all the data for the past few years. And it actually turned out that North Ayrshire, that council area, was producing a huge amount of hazardous waste, and a huge amount of it was going south of the border. And I thought it was quite, you're refusing to accept it, but you've been exporting it out your area for the last 20 or 30 years, and nobody was aware. So,
Yeah.
so it's a challenge, and we're not going to sort out. But we always give our guests a magic wand to sort one thing in the waste sector, and you can use it for what you feel yourself first, Serena.
You go first on this one.
If I had a magic wand, I would probably say that it would be brilliant to give every single individual in this industry the same education level so that we can all work in harmony. So because our industry is so vast and you have your very specialized sectors, whether it be landfills or tankers or effluent treatment plants, it'd be great to give everybody an understanding of every single moving part across the industry. And that way, I'm sure there'll be more innovative ideas, more progression for the future infrastructure. And yeah, I just think that'd be brilliant.
It's a big focus in the education and training. Do you think, in terms of your own organisation, how does your company do that education training piece? Is there a lot of work goes into that in terms of trying to upskill everybody?
Yes. So the West Midlands, where I first started my career growth, there is a lot of waste companies covering a wide variety of different waste material and streams. As you move through different areas of the country, so being in the East Midlands now, you find that there is obviously waste management companies and providers and service offerings. But when we moved over here, I tended to notice that there wasn't a hazardous waste transfer station present. So as you develop a business into a new sector with new service offerings, I found it quite interesting that the ability to go out and just hire a specific skill set disappeared. So then the discussion evolving around, okay, so we're in a new sector in this area where there isn't really any previous experience. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go through the training matrix and go through education. We lean on the CRWM a lot for that because they offer packages and courses, and there's individual sort of providers that offer bespoke services for waste classification, waste essentials for what you require under duty of care. We pride ourselves in taking the time to bring people into the industry with the right knowledge and basis to take it to the next level in the future.
I always find it fascinating the sheer the sheer level of detail in some, in the whole sector. There's experts sit upon experts, really, isn't it? So if you do, your health care waste, for example, or your hygiene waste, that in itself is a specialist area. Your hazardous waste is a specialist area. And there's people then specialising further up the chain in that. All that's me 30 years in the sector, and I would say I'm still a generalist. I know a wee bit about everything and not very much about anything, sort of thing. What about yourself, Serena? Any magic wands? Anything you'd like to cure the world of?
I think for me, there needs to be a massive reduction in barriers to innovate. It's really easy to get bogged down in legislation, regulations, but there's not really any time left to think outside the box and to come up with new ideas. And I think if you do come up with those new ideas and you want to innovate and you want to do a new process, I think there's far too many hoops to jump through. I think the answer is too often no, rather than, okay, how can we make this work? And how can multiple people, multiple companies and the regulatory bodies, how can we work together to make these improvements? Because at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same goal.
And you probably noticed that when you were trying to get the Advetec equipment, permitted, you probably noticed there was a bit of a challenge there, because you were probably sitting there with, you know, a textbook to say this is what the Advetec equipment will do, and you're trying to convince the Environment Agency that you should be allowed a permit for that activity. Is it often difficult when you've not actually got the bit kit on your site?
Yes.
Okay. Final question for me. You're both young people in the sector. I'm not gonna challenge you to ask your ages, but any advice to the younger people, school leavers, students thinking about the waste sector? How do we do that? I'm involved with a piece of work with CRWM at the moment, and they're trying to put together a sort of career pack, if you like, so that we can, the industry as a whole can have sort of standardised career information about the waste sector that they can share when they go to jobs fairs, and so on. They can have a bit of a consistent message. Any advice from yourselves about people wanting to come into the sector, apart from just do it?
I guess from my point of view, going sort of more specialised towards chemistry and my thoughts and experiences when I was at university, the waste sector was never even an option. It was never discussed. It was never on my radar. No one ever came and said, oh, what about this? And I think it was only because I took the leap to go, oh, I'll give this a go, that I ended up. And I think actually a lot more people coming out of university that have done chemistry, who don't see themselves, you know, in a lab 9 to 5, would actually really enjoy this industry and enjoy the variation, actually applying your knowledge into real life, real world problems. And you actually start to see real change, rather than in a lab, it's a lot of, you know, data finding and years of research before you see change.
It sounds good. I totally agree with that sentiment. What about yourself, Connor?
My advice would be fairly simple in that coming into this industry, I would encourage individuals to keep their eyes open, because new ideas comes from fresh perspectives.
I think we'll be exhausted my extensive list of questions. Just left to say thank you both Connor and Serena for coming on, for sharing what you do. If I'm down in your part of the world, I'd love to have a wee nosy around your sites. I might just try and make sure I organise that next time I'm down your way. So thank you.
More than welcome to head down anytime, and thank you for hosting us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
No bother. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again next Thursday at 4 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share with friends, and send us your feedback at hello@rubbishtalk.co.uk.